Yeah, so now
There it is.
recording on the cloud. Um,
How many folks did you have yesterday in church at Adult Forum?
Big group.
yeah, Marilyn was there,
Yeah.
but there were probably, I don't know, 7 or 8 of us.
Mhm.
Does that sound about right?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's pretty much what I thought. You know, it was, let's see, Jim Ives, Jim Wolf, Daniela Pfeiffer,
Kip Travis.
Kip was there. Trying to think who was on my left, and you were there.
Brad and Mark
Yeah, Mark Kelly
and Brad and I.
and Brad Nye. Yeah.
And then Elaine Oxenberg was sitting back.
Oh yeah, yeah. And Elaine Oxenberry was there. So it was a good crowd. It was a
Mhm.
good crowd and a good discussion. And we will have a good discussion now. And so I'm going to share my screen and get up my slides because, you know, you don't want to look at me or everybody else all this time. We can look at these slides and go from there. So all right, and there are the sheep.
Great.
Yeah, and so there are the sheep, and they were so placid, you know. That was so nice. They didn't care if we were there or not. Yeah, I mean, well, I don't know. They may have looked at us a little bit, but they certainly just laid there. And there were 2 Denver water trucks with, you know, staff people in them saying, "Don't bother the sheep," you know. So, but gosh, it was a lovely day. It was just a lovely day, as the picture shows. So, anyway, what I had, you know, what this is pretty informal. Marilyn's going to hear this again.
Well, that's okay.
She was there yesterday. Pretty informal. I've got some summaries of the chapters, just so that we kind of can be on the same page in case anybody read the stuff early and doesn't remember it all. And then we can talk about whatever we want from the material. I've got a couple of, you know, I sent those out with email, a couple of discussion prompts that we can use, but we don't have to. We can really just sort of talk about whatever it is that we want to talk about in this material, because that's what we can do. So the introduction to the book, and of course, when I've got these notes here, these are my notes, what struck me, and if anything else struck anybody else, that's really great. But she starts out by talking about the distinction that she hears all the time, and I think most of us do too, about what's spiritual. You know, people claim to be spiritual and not religious, and wondering what that means. I think a lot of us wonder what that means. But she has this great question: who has the key to the treasure box of more? If you're spiritual but not religious, what's that more that takes you out of religious to spiritual, and who has the key to that? She tells the story of a conversation, I think, with a rabbi, and she was supposed to go give a talk to a group of people and nervous about it. And he says, well, just, you know, what's saving your life now? Bringing all of this to a very immediate personal point. And so she thinks about that and talks about, you know, this sort of spiritual but not religious thing. And again, asks the question, you know, who wants to study a menu when you can eat the meal? And I think she sort of implies that a lot of what people hear about in terms of spirituality or even religion is this whole thing about, well, we have this menu, when what people are really longing for is something more. And then she mentions that the book is a field guide and not a curriculum. As somebody who didn't say this yesterday, but as somebody who does a lot of bird watching and all this other kind of stuff, I have a lot of field guides, but you can't sit down and read a field. You can't read a field guide. A field guide is something that you use when you're in the field. And so it's something that you refer to, or the guide that points you in a direction, but it's not a curriculum. And then she reminds us that wherever we are, we have everything we need to begin. So that was what I got out of that introductory piece. And so before we move on to the meaty part of the chapters, I'm wondering if other folks got something out of those introductory pages.
Well, years ago, a friend of mine, a good shepherd, and I were talking about what our vision of God was, and he described that his feeling was that it's the more. And I kind of latched on to that. It didn't hurt that the fact that he was Diane Moore's husband, Art Moore. So I could see where he would relate to that quite well. But anyway, yeah, Art and I had a lot of good discussion, but that was one that stuck with me. And I've kind of accepted that and she reminded me of it in the introduction, is there's no way we can define God or the creator or the supreme being or him or her, whatever you want to call God. But to me, that I can get my arms around that. There is more, and God is the more.
Yeah, and then of course, she would raise the question: is who's got the key to that treasure box? Whatever the more is there somebody or something that people claim that you have to, this is the key. You've got to have one key to open that treasure box. And so I really like that question, is that, yeah, there's the more, but there are folks who claim there's only one key and they have it. So who has that? And I saw her question as being sort of rhetorical, and implying that you've got your own key to the more. There isn't somebody else's key. But yeah.
Hi, Anthony.
Hey, how's it going? And my dad's here too.
You're on now.
Yay!
Good job.
We're on his iPad. We're not on my computer.
Okay, well, thanks, Anthony.
Yo, you bet, definitely.
Yeah, something was going on with the mic.
Okay.
Because
we can see you good. We can hear you good.
Okay.
Good to see you.
Yeah, absolutely.
Haven't really seen you much since before COVID.
Yes, it has been a while. I wanted to, call and say, hey, I've got some time coming up. I wouldn't mind, maybe trying to help out at the church, seeing if there's maybe some things we can do with technology, or see if I know last time there were still things that needed to be done. And if you need anything, let us know, because we'd be more than happy to help.
Thanks.
Yeah,
Appreciate
absolutely.
that. So good to see you, Mike. Is Sally there too?
No,
Uh-oh.
she'll come back next week.
Okay. All right. So
What did we miss?
just a little bit of discussion about the introduction to the book. Mostly what I was talking about was just my sort of key points that I took from those first few chapters, or those first few pages, just about how do we get in touch with this more, capital M more, that Whit was just talking about, and do we sort of put it in its own box. And I think that that's what she's the author Barbara Brown Taylor is really sort of pointing to. So you haven't missed much at all. Any other thoughts on this introduction, or shall we jump to chapter 1?
Let's do chapter 1.
Okay, we can do that. So chapter 1 was all of titled "Waking Up to God." It has to do with visioning. How do we, how might we see God or see God active? And assuming you've read the book, this is just review. But she starts with this story about walking in Hawaii, and she talks about the adolescent energy underfoot. That Hawaii is always growing. There's always something volcanic or something going on, and so it's just really energy. This sort of energy happening all the time. And she tells the story about finding this set of 3 stones set upright, and says that whoever had come before her had set up an altar, which she then referred to or recalled as Bethel, which in Hebrew means house of God. And then she recalls the story of Jacob in a certain place, spending the night and using a stone as a pillow. And when he wakes up from this dream of the angels of God ascending and descending, he says, gosh, God is in this place and I didn't know it, which is, I just think, such a fabulous image for us. And then she goes on to say, coming out of that, is that, wow, the whole world is a house of God. And then she, with this sort of tossing of a crumb of bread, saying, including churches are okay, but the whole world is the house of God, and churches are okay. But then she sort of picks up on that, and she says that, well, somewhere along the line, we bought or were sold the idea that God is chiefly interested in religion. And so even though the whole world is the house of God, somewhere along the line, we began to sort of domesticate that. And she implies, or she thinks, that that's kind of problematic, and goes on to say that, people encounter God in many ways and places. And this gets kind of the thing that you were talking about, Whit, is that there is this more, and we don't all see it in the same way. But she also says, well, since we can encounter God in many ways and places, we don't have to choose. We don't have to say that it's here or there. We can say that it's here and there, which is a very Episcopalian way of looking at it, that, it's both and. And then she sort of ends with this question of, how do we set a little altar in the world or in our heart? How do we, when we're out there, how do we make this place for ourselves an altar? So that was what I got out of. Those were the summary points that I got out of that chapter. I don't know if anybody else has other pieces. Marilyn, I don't know if you remember anything that came up in the discussion yesterday.
No, I think people were talking about their own altar and how they would find it. But that was their discussion question after that. But no, I think this covers it pretty well.
Okay. Marianne, was there anything that jumped out of that chapter for you? We'll
Again, not so much that it jumped out from the chapter, it's just I connected personal experiences with what she was talking about.
Yes.
Okay. Well, then, go ahead, Whit.
I think if we can go back to your slide. I think what I got out of it is, it says, your last line, how do we set an altar in the world or in our heart? I think one way is inviting God to come into us, into our heart, knowing that God is there and that God is everywhere. But, as human beings, we like to define everything or put it in a box. And it's human nature for us to want to figure out what everything is. And obviously we cannot figure out exactly what God is. So to me, that idea of inviting God into your heart is one thing that I think you can do to make that altar in your heart.
Okay, well, that is, and Marianne's point is a good segue to a couple of discussion questions. But again, we don't have to stay there. But is there a time in your life when you have woken up to God, and where were you, and can you describe that? And perhaps how it made a huge difference for you. And I'll just start by telling a story that Marilyn heard yesterday, is that in 1996, I took a group of students to Costa Rica, and we went to the national shrine in Costa Rica called in a town called Cartago. And everybody, all these Ticos, these Costa Ricans, this was where they went. This was their shrine, and people from all over the country would converge on this place, and it was a wonderful building. But the building was over a grotto, a cave kind of thing, and then next to the building was a spring. A holy spring, a holy water, what they considered holy water. And this was, for an American Protestant to go into this place where this really earthy spirituality was on display. When people got onto the precincts of the shrine, they would drop to their knees and crawl on their knees to the building and into the building. And then they would go down into the grotto and they would leave little amulets and things like that of how they've been healed. And then they would go, or others would go to the little spring. And, if they had babies, they would splash water from this sacred spring on their babies. And that really earthy spirituality just really made an impact on me, because it was so different than sort of Western Protestant thinking that it's all head. And we've got to get doctrine right, and all those kinds of things, rather than, wow, here's this hole in the ground and here's water coming out and this is where God is. And it was just so profound for me. And it fit into the context of a lot of other things in my life, but that was just really, really huge. And, so my questioning about what's the right way of doing spirituality and the wrong way of spirituality, that sort of really altered with that trip to Costa Rica in the spring of 1996. So that's an example in where I woke up. I don't know if there are examples that you all have or want to share, but just throw that out as one.
I had
When I talk with,
Go ahead. Go ahead.
when I talk with people that go on the mission, they usually come back and say, I had to go on the mission to find God. There's something about our comfortableness that seems to put blinders on our soul about being spiritual all the time.
Mm-hmm.
When I talk to the Muslim cleric, he says that Christianity tends to be really good on Sunday, but not so hot on Monday through Saturday, because we tend to put it in a building.
Yeah.
He says, that's why I pray. That's why my faith prays 5 times a day,
So God is always with us. So I think it shows you that your faith is, if it's comfortable, sometimes it can be in a fog. It's not always with you. I've told this story, and most of you have heard it, but I'll tell it again if you've forgotten it or haven't heard it. When I was 6 years old, I was picking fruit with my grandmother, my Sicilian grandmother. She had no education. She was raised Benedictine, where you pray in the morning, set what you're going to do for the glory of God. And at the end of the day, you pray again and review what you've done for the glory of God, whether raising family or getting food or whatever. So that's what she had. And we were picking fruit, and we were picking peaches. And we had a small peach tree in the orchard. And she said, "Mikey, come here. I'm 6 years old." She spoke broken English. She couldn't speak smooth English. And she says, "Look," and she pulls the limb back, and on the limb is this peach that is perfectly red and just gorgeous. And she looks at me and she says, Mikey, this is the work of God." And pulls me into her bosom and cries. She seared my soul forever. She also taught me at that age that God is everywhere, because she showed it to me then. And so I really don't have a tough time finding God. He always seems to be around.
Well, thank you.
That's good.
Go ahead,
Praise God.
Marianne.
I was going to say, I, without going into a whole great deal of detail, had a period of time where things were very, very difficult. And I like to say I ran away. I left work, I left home, and I went to the ocean, and which was about 4 hours away from where I was. And I got a hotel room, and I told people, I need some time just to myself, which was highly unusual in a situation where family thought it was work problems and work thought it was family problems. I was like, I don't care what you think. I just need time to get my head together. And I had gone thinking, I don't know, that I had brought things with me to read. I had, brought a journal. I thought I would do a lot of processing, and that would get me to where I needed to be to go back and kind of continue on with some difficult things. And I got to the beach, and it was May, and it was cool, and there was nobody there. I was truly just alone on the beach for 4 days. And all I could keep thinking the whole time, I wrote nothing, the whole time I was at the beach, would be I would breathe in and out with the ocean waves. It's like, fear not, just be. Fear not, just be. Fear not, just be, over and over again. And as I walked down the beach, there was a pod of dolphins, and they stayed with me for probably 2 miles down the beach. Every time I looked out, they were like right, out, I don't know, 400 feet or something, but next to me. And, I sat down, they just hung around. And then I came back, and the next day I went back, and there was, I don't know, I'm going to say 50 pelicans, like this, I don't know, like you would see birds normally in, like they're migrating, but they were just coming all along, passing over and over. It seemed like it took forever for these things, but the whole time it was just healing and sort of affirming to just be there and just soak it in. And I have for a long time had the practice of picking up, call them ocean stones. I don't know, stones that have been made smooth by the ocean, by the action of the ocean. And so I was doing that as well. And when I came home, I took them, and on my desk at work, I built little towers of 3 or 4 stones around in a circle. And that was just there to help me remember and to bring me back over and over again when things were difficult to, it's okay, everything is going to be okay, just be. And in that moment, I felt that sort of peace of God, P-E-A-C-E, of God, and sort of affirmation that she was close and comforting and real. And I think that, those little stones, people would come into my office because I also had a stone vase that I had kind of in the center of it that I put a flower in each morning. And people would come in and they comment on, oh, this looks very Zen. It's like, not Zen exactly, but it still is holding comfort for me. And I could pick one up and sort of, rub it like a worry stone. But other people would come in to sit and talk about whatever it was that was going on and pick up a stone. And they would also, use it as a worry stone. So it just, when she was talking about, I don't know, the whole Jacob and seeing these stones stacked on top of each other, it really resonated.
Great story.
Yeah.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
It made me think about I'm sitting at a fold down desk that my dad and I refinished 50 years ago, and on the top of the desk between my computer and the screen that I'm looking at, there are a bunch of stones that I have collected from different places, and how we think about setting up this altar someplace else, but how that experience of being someplace else, if we pick up one of those stones and we becomes an altar in and of itself to remind us of those other places when we aren't there.
Mm-hmm.
And so yeah, I hadn't thought about that so much until you told that story, Marianne. So thank you. Other thoughts, other experiences, either with this first bullet point question or with the second one. I think I really
remember. Okay, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Marilyn, go.
Yes, I remember. I had not been a very good church person for many years, and a few years ago, I believed in God, but it wasn't a primary force in my life. And a few years ago, I was in South Africa, and we had gone on an early morning safari to see the sunrise. And so we did, and the sun rose, and it took my breath away because there were elephants and all these animals bustling around. And I thought, I just felt, I don't want to say shell shocked, but I just was in awe of the whole thing. And I thought, how can people not believe there's a God? It really changed my life a lot. And I ended up a few months later coming to Good Shepherd.
Oh, wow.
But it made me stop and think. So and it was a peaceful feeling, like Marianne said, a peaceful feeling. And I have pictures on the wall of my trip behind me. And every once in a while, when I get frustrated or angry or whatever, I'll just pick out one of my pictures and it'll take me to a different place. And it just calms me down, de-stresses me, and I feel a presence of God saying it's going to be all right. And so if just people say, how did it change your life? And I'll say, I can't put it into words, but it truly did. Because I looked and I thought, how can people not believe that there's a God? It was just a very moving experience.
Well, that kind of brings us back to the point. We may have already talked about it, but so what's more important, spirituality or religion?
Mm-hmm. Well,
I'm not asking Marilyn that question, I'm throwing it out in general.
No. One of the things that I often say when I did this more at DU, but I've done it a couple of times at Good Shepherd, is one of the things that liturgy does, good liturgy does, is it creates a box into which people can pour themselves, but it creates a container. And that can be both good and bad. You can turn the box into the only thing, or you can say, here's a place where you can work this out. And, so I hear what you're saying, Whit, and I'm not arguing for religion at all. But I think a lot of people sort of need that box because everything is so huge that if there isn't something to help contain it and give shape to it, they find it really hard to work with. And, I think
No, I'm not anti-religion, but it does kind of bring up the point is that we tend to build churches and put God in the church.
Mhm.
And as Mike was saying, then we check out at the door for the next 6 days. And it's
Right.
easy to do that. Another metaphor I liked is we go to church on Sunday, get our battery charged, and then all during the week we discharge. Then we have to go back and get our battery charged again. So it's curious. I'm a cradle Episcopalian, lifelong churchgoer, and so I don't have a problem as for with organized religion. But somehow or another we have to get more to where we take it into the world. And I think it's easy just to say, I feel good when I go to church and I'm doing the right thing and I'm a good person. But then life and the world gets in the way.
When Martin Luther King marched in Chicago to stop redlining houses so African Americans could move into housing, he marched through a Polish neighborhood, which was 90% Catholic. They were surrounded by the National Guard because those Polish Catholic, by the way, I'm half Polish. My grandmother was Catholic. And those Polish Catholics were throwing rocks, were screaming obscenities. And I cried because I thought you were Christian. I thought you believed in the teachings of Jesus. What are you doing that you can go to church on Sunday and then behave on that and on a march, a peaceful march?
Wow. That's a story, Mike. Thank you. Wow. Well, we could spend the rest of the evening here, and that's fine. Or I can be faithful to my schedule. That's the religion piece, right? and say, shall we just move to chapter 2 and see if there's some stuff there that really grips
Yes.
folks as well.
Yes.
Okay. So, trying to move. There we go. So she starts out in chapter 2 with this quote from Julian in Norwich, which I sort of summarized as the whole world in a hazelnut, and this really great story that she tells, and then she talks about going outside and laying down. I think it was with her grandfather and looking up at the sky, and she sees
Their dad.
Was it her dad? And sees this shower of falling stars, which somebody had called, I had never heard this before, the tears of St. Lawrence. But talks about just this sense of awe, reverence that's going on. And she says that, reverence was the proper attitude of a small and curious human being, a small child, in a vast and fascinating world of experience. And it says it's a virtue that keeps people from trying to act like gods, which she expands upon, a little bit more. You see the bottom bullet point there, that an irreverent soul is one who is unable to feel awe in the presence of things higher than the self. And the typo there is also unable to feel respect in the presence of things that one sees as lower than the self. And, we see a lot of really, really proud people. We've seen this in the US over the last 6 or 8 years a lot, who have no respect for anybody lower and no respect for anything higher. They think that they are the pinnacle. And so there's no reverence there. But then she tells this story about cleaning a gun, this whole ritual of cleaning a gun, and how she sees that as a really very reverent act. So it raises the question about, about what's reverence. She goes on, and we talked about this a little bit, or referred to it in a bit, is that a formal worship service can be a confusing place to look for reverence. And I can say that as somebody who's up front, that, that's my job, is to make that work for other people, but it doesn't always work for me. It's amazing when it does. But, but it is sometimes a confusing place to sort of be that. But it takes all kinds of forms. What is it that awakens awe in you? And then she talks about this practice of spending 20 minutes outside. And Whit will know this because we did this when we were up on the walk and we were waiting. Whit may not know this because we were waiting for Irma and Whit to catch up to us. And so I told everybody else, say, just go sit for 20 minutes, go find a place to be for 20 minutes while we're waiting for Whit and Irma to join us, and just soak it in. You have no agenda other than just to be out there. And the stories that they told were pretty cool, weren't they, Whit?
Yes.
Yeah. And then, she says that reverence demands a pace. And we don't often just want to go someplace and sit. Mary Ann, you talked about 4 days. There was a lot of sitting and or walking, but just sort of being present to your experience and what that brings. I love the point that she says then towards the end of this chapter is that reverence for creation comes fairly easy. It's great looking at the pelicans. They're so cool. Or the pods of dolphins. But there are these really annoying people that you run into all the time. And being reverent, seeing them as, in terms of reverence, is hard. And, regarded, she goes on, regarded properly, anything can become a sacrament. That inward, or that outward invisible sign of an inward and invisible grace, anything can be a sacrament. And we've got a lot of stuff. We've got laying on of hands, we've got bread, we've got wine, we've got water, we've got marriage, we got rings and, graves. We got all sorts of things that we talk about in terms of sacraments, but anything can be. And then she closes with this really sort of great discussion of reverence being a pain. I don't know if there were there other things in this chapter that my bullet points didn't address that you recall. We can go.
You mind going back to your first set of bullet points?
Sure.
I think Mike's story of the peach was equivalent to the story of Julian and Norch in the hazelnut, because what she saw in that hazelnut, Mike found or saw in that peach. And to me, the effect was similar. And so that was a great story, Mike.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Thanks for making that connection, Whit. I hadn't seen it in quite the same way, but you're absolutely right. It's perfect.
And the ritual of cleaning a gun, when she started talking about her Remington single action bolt 22 caliber rifle, I bet it was a Model 510 because that's what I had.
Yeah.
I was growing up.
Yeah.
And I had a father that did the same thing, not as meticulous as she described, which could have been enhanced or not. But anyway, but definitely doing the same thing. You don't go out and shoot, target practice and come back and just throw the gun in the corner. And taught me how to break it down, clean it, and all this kind of stuff. So I understood that story. I know a lot of people can't relate to it, particularly in an environment where guns are bad, which I understand that. It's a real issue now. But anyway, that was, I enjoyed the heck out of that chapter.
Cool. Any other responses? We can go to the discussion questions. They provide prods, but that's all.
You want to go to your second bullet points? Yeah.
One of the things I wanted to comment on with her, her approach, it sounds like to me, like I think she says, mentioned something about the gun was gleaming and, her attention to detail and how honored she was a part of this relationship. I just wanted to, there's a detail there, short little details that the gun was gleaming. So it seems like, it almost an aura or an awe when she's speaking about having that relationship or about the relationship. It just feels like, to me, like almost, at times reverence and the opposite of. So
that's really interesting. Your perception there of the reverence that's shown in her writing, and how that comes through.
Recognition of something greater, or just, yeah. She mentions God too. I just remember there was this feeling of just building already. And I mean, that's great. It's the first chapter, second chapter. Here we go again. It just, I felt like this. It's not a slow incline. It seems like it's the direction is starting to come into picture. So I almost feel like I'm waiting to see something already, not at the end of the book and all, but something's coming.
Well, thank you, Anthony. Marianne, Marilyn, anything you want to throw in here? Or shall I just jump to those questions and see if there's anything that jumps out of the questions?
Okay.
Take a look and jump into either one of those if you want.
I mean, I think we've all experienced that sense where we've been somewhere. I certainly have, whether it be at the top of a mountain or looking up at shooting stars at the beach, or I don't know. For me, it typically happens in nature where you have that sense of being put in your place. You have that sense of being a tiny speck in a huge world. We went to Yosemite and it was like February, so it was cold and crisp, and we went out with a ranger at 10 o'clock at night to look at the stars and to listen to the various stories of different cultures and how they talked about the constellations. And the whole time the ranger was talking, I was just looking up, and you could see the Milky Way, and you could, it was just perfect dark night sky. And it was almost dizzying, it was such a feeling of, I don't know, she did a good job of giving you both the feeling of you were a tiny speck and yet you were connected to these people over, thousands of years who had each experienced the same sky and tried to make sense of it in their own way.
we're at the time of year in China that's the mid-autumn, what they call the mid-autumn festival. And since our two kids are Chinese, we paid attention to it. But one of the traditions of the mid-autumn festival is that everybody goes out on the same night and looks up at the moon. And regardless of where you are in the world, you know that your loved ones are looking at the same moon. And that binds you together with people that you aren't physically with. And so what you mentioned, Miriam, makes me think about that is that what is that reference point that says that we are all bound together? In this wonderful festival that we usually celebrate. We didn't do it this year because just too many things coinciding, but that wonderful festival, for people who are parents of adopted children, to have the children go out and look at that moon and hope that maybe the parents that bore them are looking at that moon and wondering what's happening. It's a very powerful symbol, but what is it that is out there that we can all sort of use as a touchstone that binds us together? It really does, in some respects, put us in our place that our whole world isn't around the dinner table. It's much bigger than that. Yeah.
When I was a sophomore in high school, my father said, come, we're going to go to a mass. And it was on Tuesday. And I had just been working on the farm. And so I went with him and he made me put some slacks and a shirt on. And I wish he'd have left me in my work clothes because I didn't know where we were going. And we went to another big farm that had the immigrants from Mexico working there. And there was about 10 of them. And they came out of the barn filthy, dirty clothes, shoes with holes in them. And Father Hookdrup was there, the Catholic priest. And we went back in the barn and had a mass said there, and they received communion. And as they had come out, they saw me standing there. And one of the men came up to me and apologized because of his clothes. He said, he in Spanish, he apologized and said something la ropa, talking about his clothes, that he wasn't dressed very nice for mass. And I loved my faith and I loved the service and I loved that we gave communion to those men. I was so sad that there's a world out there of pain and suffering that is always there. And as a sophomore in high school, I always felt that we came from a poor family because there was 7 of us and my father was the only one working. And I had like maybe two pair of jeans and 3 shirts for school. And I realized then how rich I was compared to these workers, that they had nothing and had to get up the next day and go to work in terrible conditions. It was a painful side of Reverence for me.
Mm. What a story.
Ooh.
Mm. Thank you.
I have to tell you, to add on, because there's a good side to that story. My father would co-sign loans for the Hispanics because the banks wouldn't touch them and nobody else would touch them, to just buy a washing machine,
Wow.
to just buy a dryer, to just buy, basic things that they needed for their home. He did that for 10 years and only 2 loans defaulted in 10 years. So as poor as they were hardworking, they were honest, they were deeply religious. So there was a good side from that aspect of knowing how they've assimilated into our culture throughout the United States. They've really given us a wonderful life. We're very blessed that they're a part of our society.
Marilyn, anything?
No, not right now. Thank you.
It's all right. I'm just making sure.
Thanks.
On kind of the lighter, I don't want to say the lighter side, but sort of also on this issue of the painful side. I told the story yesterday, and so Marilyn, forgive me, but I taught a class at DU, and in the course of the class, we invited in the guy who was the head of the catering, the food services at the university. And a number of the students said, well, we really want locally grown food. And all the time. And he said, well, that means you're not going to get any fruit in winter because we don't have any locally grown fruit in Colorado in the winter. And it raised this whole discussion about what it takes to get food to your table. And whether it's coming from Mexico or whether it's coming from the West Slope or whether it's coming from, from Japan. I mean, it takes a lot to get food to your table. And most of us never give a thought to that. The carbon footprint, the human labor, all of that stuff. And to your point, Mike, these poorly paid workers and how we benefit from that. And is looking at a clementine, a mandarin orange, and just saying, how did this get into my hands? What is it that took, from the people who cultivated the orchards to the folks who flew the airplanes what did it take for this mandarin orange to get into my hands? And isn't that a point of reverence, if you can just sort of step back? And so, Mike, your story is a lot like that, I think. Seeing the human side of it.
We tend to forget the low cost of food comes from working from sunrise to sunset among heavily pesticide fruit or harvesting, and they tend to get sick from that. And yet we kind of hide it and kind of ignore it. And it's really sad that it conflicts with talking about where your spirituality is. Because if it's always with you, it says I believe, you have to recognize it and do the best you can to explain it to other people who want to ignore it, and go at least try to adjust that view that it's okay for the lifestyle they have for these people to give it to you. I think that's wrong.
Mhm.
I think Jesus said that was wrong, and that the poorest of poor we should take care of. Now, if you think we've got it bad, during Jesus' time, it was unbelievable
Exactly.
what they went through.
Exactly.
I mean, it was just, you wouldn't believe how poor could be that poor, and how they would have to survive. So he was really pushing for a social change that conflicted with the Jewish elders and their beliefs, and with the Romans, actually, with most of what was going on in that time. So in many ways, we've transcended to a better world, but I believe in many ways, we still have a painful side of our faith that we don't honestly address. And I think she's trying to get us to look at our faith all the time more.
Yeah, I think you're right. And in some
And then-
respects, go ahead. What?
Oh, you finish.
No, I wasn't going to say anything. I was going to kind of close it up because it's a little after 8. But so you say what you were going to say, Whit.
I think one of our problems today is we've created more gods, and most of those gods are material things.
Yes.
And we all love our remote controls and our cell phones and all this stuff. So I think it's easier to fall into the trap. Back then, we have so many distractions today and so many things that we can give our attention to that it's hard just to focus on the things that matter.
Yes.
Thank you. Any
That's all.
other sort of closing thoughts? Like I say, it's a little after 8, and my Zoom account is probably going to kick us off in just a minute. Since it's not one of the pro accounts anymore.
Thank you for your time, Father and Lady.
Oh yeah,
Really appreciate it.
no, this is rich. You all give me such a great amount to think about, and but I'm hoping that, you know, we're learning from each other, not just about the topics of the book, but about each other's spiritual lives and the depth that is present in all of us, that, you know, rushing by each other on a Sunday morning or something else we don't see. And so this is a rich time, and I'm very grateful for this.
It was a great idea.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you know, maybe I'll stop trying to record it and we'll just do this like this, so that we're not reacting to what other people have said, but sort of engaging in our own level of conversation. Marilyn was there yesterday. She gets to do it again, you know, and so do I. And I learned and am enriched by these conversations. So thank you.
Well, I told Gary before we started this that I read this book years ago and I liked it a lot. And then through moves and whatever, I lost it or I gave it away. And I'm really glad to get to be able to go back through it and to discuss it.
Good.
Jerry, I think after being there yesterday and today, I would hope you would keep this part being live.
Okay.
Just, it's more involved watching rather than watching what everybody said yesterday, of us being able to express our own opinions and our thoughts.
Okay.
So
I'm open to that. You know, if I'm going to spend an hour, you know, doing this, it's much more engaging to sort of do it live, because it brings up other stuff rather than just saying, well, how did you respond to what happened yesterday? So thank you, Marilyn. We'll just continue to do that, and I won't worry about the recording anymore. Just takes away one more stressor, technological stressor. and it makes it real, and it makes it live. So yeah, I'm happy to do that. That's okay. So next week, either in person or here or both, chapters 3 and 4, wearing skin, the practice of wearing skin. What does it mean to sort of build an altar in the fact that you are a human physical person? And then where are we grounded? Groundedness, what she calls the practice of walking on the earth. So we'll see what those bring, or what kinds of things those draw out of us. Unfortunately, we won't be, you can all go out and do this on your own, but we won't be walking Waterton Canyon as a group between now and then, but there are other opportunities. So anyway, thank you all. Blessings. Look forward to seeing you soon, and hearing any other kinds of ideas or thoughts that you have on any of this, individually or corporately. But for right now, I'll say good night. I hope you have a peaceful, reverent night in which there are lots of visions.
Thanks a lot.
Thanks, Jerry.
Bye now.
Good night.